In my family, blood is merely fuel my parents siphon from one child to feed the other's vanity. You might think theft is the worst part. No, it is realizing that money was meant to save my brother's life. Yet they blew it on balloons and champagne. They unknowingly sentenced him to a broken future for a single night of applause. Here is how I made them pay for the most expensive birthday party in history. My name is Geraldine Southwell. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse living room, watching Chicago disappear into a white void. The snow was falling with a relentless, heavy silence, erasing the sharp angles of the skyscrapers and the gray bleed of the lake. It was the kind of cold that lived in the bones of this city, a wet, biting chill that found its way through wool and cashmere. Inside, however, the air was stiflingly warm. The gas fireplace roared with an artificial, perfectly regulated hunger, consuming nothing but fuel lines and money. I adjusted the sleeves of my blazer. It was a structured piece from the latest Saint Laurent collection, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. It cost $4,000. To anyone else, it was fashion. To me, it was armor. At 32 years old, as the chief strategy officer of Ethelgard Systems, I had learned that if you did not dress like a weapon, people would treat you like a target. I spent my days navigating corporate acquisitions and hostile takeovers, dismantling companies with the stroke of a pen. I was good at it because I understood leverage. I understood that power was not about who shouted the loudest, but who could sit in the silence the longest without flinching. But here, in this apartment that my name was on the lease for, I felt my armor cracking. Beatrice was humming. My mother moved around the mahogany dining table like a conductor orchestrating a symphony that no one else could hear. She adjusted a crystal goblet by a fraction of an inch. She smoothed a linen napkin until it looked less like fabric and more like a slab of white marble. She was 60 years old, but her face was a frozen landscape of Botox and fillers, a mask that allowed only the vaguest suggestion of an expression. She was performing domestic perfection. It was her favorite role. Roger, my father, sat in the leather wingback chair by the fire, swirling a glass of aged scotch. The ice clinked against the glass, a rhythmic, annoying sound that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing headache behind my left eye. He had retired 10 years ago, claiming he wanted to focus on his golf game and his health. But the truth was simply that he lacked the stamina for the modern world. He preferred to live in the past, in a version of reality where he was a titan of industry rather than a man living off the dividends of a trust fund his father had built and his daughter now replenished. And then there was Archer. My younger brother was sprawled on the velvet sofa, his legs draped over the armrest, his face illuminated by the blue light of his smartphone. At 26, he still carried the softness of a boy who had never been told no. He was handsome in a fragile, artistic way, with curly hair that was carefully styled to look messy. He was a violinist, or rather, he was someone who owned a very expensive violin and posted photos of it on Instagram. 3,000 likes in 40 minutes, Archer announced. Breaking the silence, he did not look up. His thumb moved across the screen with a manic speed. The engagement on the new reel is insane. I told you, Mom, the black turtleneck was the right choice. It gives off that brooding genius vibe. You look like a young Paganini. Darling, Beatrice cooed, stepping back to admire the table. Doesn't he look like a genius? Geraldine. I turned from the window. The heat of the room hit me again, smelling of roasting turkey and expensive perfume. He looks like someone who spends more time editing photos than practicing scales, I said. My voice was low, flat. I was too tired for diplomacy. I had just come off an 18-hour shift at Ethelgard, managing a crisis with our Asian supply chain. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. Archer scoffed, finally looking up. You are such a boomer. Jerry, it is called personal branding. You cannot just play music anymore. You have to be a content creator. You have to build a narrative. Narrative does not pay the rent, I replied, walking toward the table. Or the tuition for the master class you dropped out of? Or the lease on this apartment? Oh, stop it. Geraldine, Roger grumbled from his chair. He took a long swallow of scotch. It is Thanksgiving. Stop counting pennies. You act like you are the only one who has ever worked a day in your life. Your brother is an artist. Artists operate on a different timeline. I pulled out my chair and sat down. The wood felt cold and hard against my back. A different timeline. That was a polite way of saying Archer lived in a fantasy while I footed the bill for reality. But I said nothing. I had bigger concerns. My mind was drifting to the file hidden in the safe at my own apartment, 3 miles away. The medical reports, the nerve conduction studies, the diagnosis was slowly, silently strangling the dexterity in Archer's left hand. Focal hand dystonia. The musician's cancer. He did not know that I knew the full extent of it. He had cried on my shoulder 8 months ago, terrified, showing me the way his ring finger curled involuntarily when he tried to play a rapid passage. He had begged me not to tell our parents. He knew, as I did, that Roger and Beatrice did not deal with weakness. To them, a defect was a personal insult. If they knew Archer was losing his ability to play, they would not offer support. They would offer disappointment. They would look at him like a broken toy. So I had taken the burden. I had found Dr. Silas Vance. I had arranged the consultation. I had lied to my parents, telling them I had an aortic aneurysm, a ticking time bomb in my chest. To justify creating a liquid medical trust fund, I told them I needed $150,000 in cash, accessible immediately, for an emergency surgery that might happen at any moment. I knew if I said the money was for Archer, they would find a way to spend it on something else, thinking I would just earn more to cover the difference. But fear of losing their primary financial provider. That was a motivator I could trust, or so I thought. Dinner is served, Beatrice announced brightly. She brought out the turkey. It was a masterpiece of culinary aesthetics, golden brown and glistening. She placed it in the center of the table with a flourish. We took our seats. Roger moved to the head of the table, picking up the carving knife and fork. He sharpened the blade against the steel, the screeching sound making my teeth ache. I am thankful, Roger began, adopting his speech-giving voice, for this family, for the success we have cultivated, for the fact that we can sit here, in this magnificent home, above the grime of the city, and enjoy the finer things. I am thankful for my fans, Archer said, pouring himself a glass of wine. And for the fact that my birthday is coming up, 26 is going to be my year. I can feel it. I am thankful for my children, Beatrice said, smiling at Archer, then glancing briefly at me. And for my health. They looked at me. It was my turn. I picked up my water glass. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. I am thankful for clarity, I said. Roger cleared his throat and sliced the first piece of meat. The juices ran onto the platter. The smell of sage and thyme filled the air. It was nauseating. Speaking of health, I said. I kept my voice casual, as if I were asking for the salt. Did the letter from Johns Hopkins arrive? The confirmation for the surgery date. I need to let HR know so I can schedule my medical leave. I watched Roger's hand. It did not pause. He continued to saw through the turkey breast, the motion smooth and rhythmic. He did not look at me. Oh, that, Roger said. Yes, it came last week. And, I asked, my heart began to hammer against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud. What is the date I need to book the flight and the hotel near the hospital? Doctor, Vance said the window is closing. Roger placed a slice of turkey on Beatrice's plate, then one on Archer's. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were glassy, slightly unfocused from the alcohol, but filled with a terrifying nonchalance. We did not book it, he said. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? You did not book it. The deposit was due on Monday. If we miss the deadline, we go to the back of the waiting list. It took me 6 months to get that slot. Relax. Geraldine, Roger said, waving the carving fork in the air. It is not a big deal. You look fine. You are working 18 hours a day. Sick people do not work like that. We figured the doctor was just being dramatic to upsell you. You know how these private specialists are. You figured? I repeated. The words tasted like ash. Roger, that money was in the trust. It was legally designated for medical expenses. Where is it? Beatrice laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. Don't interrogate your father. Darling, we put it to better use. We use the surgery money for Archer's birthday party next week. I stared at her. Then I looked at Archer. He was busy chewing, seemingly unbothered. You what? The whisper escaped me before I could stop it. It is his 26th birthday. Geraldine, Beatrice said, her voice taking on a defensive shrillness. He only turns 26 once, and we found this incredible venue on Lake Michigan. A private yacht, and we hired that PR firm to invite the top influencers in the city. It is an investment. Archer needs networking. He needs to be seen with the right people if he's going to launch his solo career. Networking, I said. Exactly, Roger chimed in, pouring gravy over his potatoes. The kid has talent, but talent needs a stage. That party is going to put him on the map. It cost a fortune. Yes, nearly the whole $150,000. But you can always make more money. Jerry, you are the corporate shark. Archer needs a leg up. $150,000. Gone. I looked at Archer. He avoided my gaze, reaching for a bread roll. It is going to be lit, Jerry, he mumbled, his mouth half full. DJ Khaled's guy might come. It is huge for my brand. I felt a sensation I had never experienced before. It was not anger. Anger was hot. This was absolute zero. It was the feeling of a star collapsing into a black hole. They had taken the money I had scraped together, the money I had humiliated myself to ask for by faking a heart condition, the money that was the only hope for saving Archer's hands, and they had spent it on a party for the very hands that were dying. And the worst part Archer knew. He knew about his hands. He knew the diagnosis. And yet, he sat there, eating stuffing, letting them burn his cure on a night of vanity. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I slowly placed my knife and fork down on the edge of my plate. The sound of the silver hitting the fine bone china rang out. Clink. It was sharp, piercing, cutting through the ambient jazz playing softly in the background. So, I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. You spent the medical trust on a yacht party. Don't be dramatic, Roger said. You can get the surgery next year, or whenever. You are healthy as a horse. Tell me, I said, looking from Roger to Beatrice, and finally resting my gaze on Archer. Do you even know who was actually the one who needed the surgery? The silence that followed was absolute. Roger stopped chewing. Beatrice's smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching. Archer froze, his hand hovering halfway to his wineglass. For a second, I saw a flicker of panic in Archer's eyes. He knew. He knew that I knew, and he was terrified I would say it. He was terrified I would expose his weakness. His focal hand dystonia, right there at the dinner table. He would rather be a fraud with a party than a patient with a cure. What are you talking about? Beatrice asked, her laugh nervous now. You are the one with the heart thing, the aneurysm, right? I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the greed in my father's watery eyes, the desperate vanity in my mother's frozen face, the cowardice in my brother's slump. They were parasites. And I had been the host, feeding them my blood, my time, my sanity, thinking that if I just gave enough, they would eventually love me, or at least respect me. But parasites do not respect the host. They consume until there is nothing left. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. A harsh, dragging sound. Geraldine, sit down, Roger commanded. We are eating. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my $4,000 blazer. I felt tall. I felt incredibly distant, as if I were watching them through the wrong end of a telescope. Enjoy the turkey, I said. And the party. I hope it is worth it. Where are you going? Beatrice cried, standing up. We haven't even had dessert. I ordered that pumpkin cheesecake you like. I am not hungry, I said. I looked at each of them, locking eyes for 1 second apiece. Eat well. Savor every bite, because this is the last meal you will ever eat for free. Oh, stop with the melodrama, Roger shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You cut us off fine. See how you feel when your family isn't there for you. You were never there, I said. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I passed the coat rack where my cashmere overcoat hung. It was cold outside, freezing. But I did not stop to take it. Leaving it there felt like shedding a skin. It felt like leaving a part of myself behind in that toxic, overheated mausoleum. I walked straight to the private elevator. I pressed the button for the garage. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of the warm, golden dining room. The silence in the elevator was pure. Down in the garage, the air was frigid. My breath plumed in front of me as I walked to my car. An Audi sedan that I had bought with my first bonus. I got in and slammed the door, sealing myself inside the leather interior. I did not start the engine immediately. The cold began to seep through my blazer, biting at my skin, but I welcomed it. It felt real. It felt like the truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline that was finally crashing into my system. I opened my banking application. I navigated to the Family Medical Trust account. I stared at the screen. The numbers glowed in the darkness of the car. Balance $0.00. A perfect, absolute void. They had taken it all, every cent. They had stolen Archer's future to buy him a night of applause. I stared at the zero until the numbers blurred. Then, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. They thought this was about money. They thought I would be angry about the $150,000. They had no idea. The money was just the beginning. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the gloom of the garage. I was not going home to cry. I was going to war. The silence in my car was not empty. It was filled with the ghostly echo of a violin that would never be played again. To the outside world, Archer was a spoiled brat who treated classical music as a backdrop for TikTok trends. That was the narrative my parents sold, and it was the narrative Archer performed. But narratives are often just scar tissue growing over a wound you are too terrified to show. The truth was far simpler and far more tragic. My brother was a genius. He had a vibrato that could make a grown man weep and a bowing technique that defied the laws of physics. But the human body is a machine, and machines break. I rested my head against the steering wheel, the leather cold against my forehead. I closed my eyes and I was no longer in the parking garage. I was back in my apartment, 8 months ago. It had been a Tuesday. I remembered because it was the only night of the week I tried to leave the office before 9 at night. Archer had shown up unannounced. He was not wearing his usual curated outfit. He was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, and his face was the color of old parchment. He did not say hello. He just held out his left hand. It looked normal, long, elegant fingers, calluses on the tips. But then he tried to make a shape, a simple C major chord shape in the air. His ring finger curled inward. It snapped against his palm like a trap closing. He tried to extend it, his face contorting with effort. The veins in his neck bulging. The finger refused. It was as if his own hand belonged to a stranger who hated him. "It started 4 months ago," he had whispered, his voice cracking. "Just a little twitch during the Paganini caprices. Now I cannot even play a scale. Jerry, I cannot play a scale. Focal hand dystonia." I knew what it was before he said the words. I had read about it. It was the executioner of musical careers. It was a neurological condition where the brain map for the hand gets confused. The signals for curl and extend fire simultaneously. It is painless, physically, but psychologically, it is a slow, agonizing death. "Have you told Mom and Dad?" I had asked. though I already knew the answer. Are you crazy? Archer had looked at me with wild, wet eyes. Dad would look at me like I am a broken racehorse. Mom would make it about her, about how tragic it is for her that her son is flawed. I cannot handle their pity. Jerry, or their disappointment. I need to fix this. Please, you fix everything. I did fix everything. That was my role in the Southwell family. I was the cleaner. I was the bank. I was the shield. I spent the next 2 weeks researching. I bypassed the local doctors and went straight for the best in the world. Dr. Silas Vance. He operated out of a private clinic in Zurich, but was doing a residency at Johns Hopkins for 6 months. He was pioneering a new technique, a specific type of stereotactic surgery combined with intensive neural retraining. It was not just surgery. It was a rewiring of the brain itself. It was also exorbitantly expensive. The surgery, the hospital stay, the months of specialized rehabilitation therapy. The total estimate came to $150,000. I could have paid for it over time. Perhaps my salary at Ethelgard Systems was substantial, but Dr. Vance required a full deposit to book the operating theater and secure his team. And more importantly, the timing was critical. I remembered sitting in Dr. Vance's office, staring at the MRI scans of my brother's brain. "We have a problem," Dr. Vance had said. He was a man who did not mince words. "The neural pathways are becoming entrenched. Think of it like a river carving a canyon. The longer the water flows the wrong way, the deeper the canyon gets. If we do not intervene within the next year, the fibrosis in the hand muscles combined with the cortical reorganization will be permanent. The window is closing, Miss Southwell." That was the term he used, the golden window. We had scheduled the surgery for the first week of December. That gave me 8 months to come up with $150,000 in cash without alerting my parents. That was the catch. If I simply gave Archer the money, Roger and Beatrice would see the transaction. They monitored his accounts like hawks. Not to protect him, but to see what they could siphon off. If they saw that kind of cash, they would descend. They would demand a cut. They would claim they needed it for investments or household emergencies, or worse, if I told them the truth, they would dismiss the surgery as experimental nonsense and use the money to buy Archer a new car to make him feel better about quitting music. So, I lied. I constructed the most elaborate lie of my life. I created a legal entity, a family medical trust, designed to bypass the usual tax implications. I told them that during a routine executive physical, the doctors had found a weakness in my aortic wall, an aneurysm. I told them I was a ticking time bomb. I told them I needed to stockpile cash for an emergency open-heart surgery that could happen at any day. It was a brilliant lie because it preyed on the only thing that could override their greed, their fear of losing their cash cow. If I died, the money stopped. Therefore, they had to let me save the money to keep myself alive. "I need you to be the trustees," I had told Roger and Beatrice, handing them the papers. "The money is locked. It can only be used for medical procedures. If I collapse, you transfer it to the hospital." It was a safeguard, or so I thought. For 8 months, I ceased to be a human being and became a machine. At Ethelgard, I took on every extra project available. I led the merger with the German robotics firm, a project that required me to be on calls at 3 a.m. and back at my desk by 7. I stopped ordering lunch. I ate instant noodles in the break room, hiding in the corner so the junior analysts would not see their director of strategy eating sodium-packed sludge. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror of the car. The lines around my eyes were deeper than they had been a year ago. That was the cost. I had liquidated my assets. I sold the vintage Cartier watch my grandmother left me. I sold 3 Hermes bags to a consignment shop in the West Loop, haggling over every $100. I canceled my vacation to the Amalfi Coast, telling my friends I was too busy with work. I moved money from my 401k, taking the tax penalty hit, just to fill that trust account. Every dollar in that account was a piece of my life that I had carved off and offered up to the God of my brother's future. And they had spent it on balloons. The realization hit me again, physically, like a punch to the gut. It was not just the theft, it was the timing. Doctor. Vance had been clear. The surgery date was next week. If we missed this slot. Doctor. Vance was returning to Zurich. His waiting list there was 2 years long. By the time Archer got to the front of the line again, the golden window would be shut. His hand would be a claw. He would never play the violin again. My parents had not just spent $150,000, they had spent Archer's hands, and Archer. The thought of him made my stomach turn. He knew. He had to know. He was the one who checked the follower counts. He was the one who approved the guest lists. He knew that the yacht, the champagne, the influencers, it all cost money. Did he really think Roger and Beatrice had suddenly found a hidden fortune? Or did he choose to look away? Maybe it was worse. Maybe he had given up. Maybe the fear of the surgery, the fear that it might fail, was more than his fragile spirit could handle. So he chose the party instead. He chose the brief rush of being a star for one night over the long, exhausting, and painful process of recovery. He had allowed me to deprive myself to help him, and then he had enjoyed the benefits that came from my sacrifice. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 8:45 p.m. The banks were closed. The lawyers were asleep, but the credit card companies, they were still operating. They always were. I picked up my phone again, my thumb lingering over the screen. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Archer. There was nothing left to say. Words were meant for people who had a sense of responsibility. My family only responded to pressure. I dialed my private banking concierge. Then I looped in my executive assistant, Sarah, who was probably at home watching Netflix, but who was compensated well enough to take my calls at any hour. Geraldine. Sarah's voice was groggy. Is everything okay? Is it the Japanese market? No, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was devoid of inflection. It was the voice I used when I was firing someone. I need you to log into my personal finance portal. I am authorizing you to execute a total freeze. A freeze on which cards? All of them, I said. The American Express Platinum Supplementary Card held by Roger Southwell, the Visa Infinite held by Beatrice Southwell, and the master account linked to Archer Southwell's spending limit. I want them reported as compromised. I want them dead, not declined, canceled. Okay, Sarah said, the sleep vanishing from her voice as she heard the seriousness in mine. I am logging in now. What about the utilities for the penthouse? They are on autopay through the Visa. Let them bounce, I said. If the payment fails, let the lights go out. I do not care. Geraldine, the banking concierge interjected. Blocking these cards will trigger immediate fraud alerts. The users will be notified. It might be embarrassing if they are in the middle of a transaction. That is the point, I said. Do it. And one more thing. I want a full audit of the Family Medical Trust. I want to see the transaction history. I want the names of every vendor, every caterer, every liquor store. I want to know exactly what my heart surgery bought. Understood, the concierge said. Freezing accounts now. I hung up. I sat there in the cold car, waiting. It would not take long. Archer was at a bar. He had said so at dinner. He was networking. That meant he was buying rounds of expensive drinks for people who only liked him because he was buying rounds of expensive drinks. I watched the snow pile up on the windshield. 1 minute passed, then 2. The phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message. The name on the screen was Archer. I stared at it. For a brief, foolish second, a part of me, the part that was still the big sister who put Band-Aids on his scraped knees, hoped it was an apology. I hoped he had realized what had happened at dinner. I hoped he was writing to say, I am sorry. I tried to stop them. I will pay you back. I opened the message. Archer, W.T.F. Jerry. The bartender just cut up my card in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Unfreeze it now. I have a tab to settle. I read the words twice. There was no mention of the surgery, no mention of the $150,000 that had vanished, no mention of the fact that I had walked out of Thanksgiving dinner into a snowstorm, no mention of my heart condition which, as far as he knew, was still a threat to my life. He only cared that his credit card had been declined. He was not a victim. He was one of them. I felt something inside me snap. It was a clean break, like a dry twig stepping on a heavy boot. The last tether of guilt, the last thread of obligation that bound me to them, severed completely. I did not reply. I deleted the thread. Then I put the car in reverse. The tires crunched over the fresh snow as I backed out of the spot. I was not going back to the penthouse. I was not going to their yacht party. I was driving to my office. I had a war to plan, and I needed a printer, a pot of coffee, and the ruthless efficiency that Ethelgard Systems paid me for. If they wanted to play games with my money, I would show them what professional financial destruction looked like. Doctor, Vance's window might be closing for Archer, but a different window had just opened for me. The window of opportunity to burn it all down. The office of Ethelgard Systems at midnight was a cathedral of silence. The only light came from the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the glow of 3 monitors arranged in a semicircle on my desk. I was not alone. Across from me sat Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant and private investigator who usually handled corporate embezzlement for my firm. He was a man who saw the world not in colors, but in debits and credits. He did not ask why I needed a personal audit at 1 a.m. on Thanksgiving. He just billed me double. "It is messy, Geraldine," Marcus said, sliding a tablet across the polished obsidian of my desk. "They did not just drain the trust, they strip-mined it." I looked at the screen. The spreadsheet was a roadmap of my family's betrayal, itemized and categorized. "Walk me through it," I said, my eyes scanning the columns. "Okay," Marcus said, pointing with a stylus. "The bulk of it, $85,000, went to Neptune Charters. That is the yacht rental. But look at the line items. They did not just rent the boat, they paid for a premium influencer package. See these transfers. $5,000 to Kylie Vibes, $7,000 to the real Marco. These are appearance fees." I felt a cold laugh building in my throat. "They paid people to come to his birthday." "Correct. They bought him friends. And look here." Marcus tapped another section. $20,000 to Apex Reputation Management. That is a bot farm. Geraldine. They bought 50,000 Instagram followers and 10,000 likes for the event posts. That engagement Archer was bragging about at dinner, it was all fake. It was bought with your heart surgery money. It was pathetic. It was so deeply, profoundly pathetic that it almost eclipsed the rage. My parents had liquidated my life savings not even for real luxury, but for a simulation of popularity. They had built a Potemkin village of success for Archer, constructed out of ones and zeros, while his actual physical ability to succeed his hands rotted away. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to a transaction near the bottom. It was smaller, only $2,000, paid to a company called Paper Trail Solutions. Marcus frowned. I flagged that too. It is a shell company, usually associated with document forgery, fake diplomas, altered bank statements, that kind of thing. I cannot see what they ordered, but the payment cleared 3 days ago. "Forgery," I repeated. A chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning ran down my spine. What did they need to forge? Archer already had a fake career. What else were they fabricating? "Keep digging on that," I said. "I want to know what they bought." Before Marcus could answer, my personal phone, which I had placed face down on the desk, began to vibrate. It danced across the glass surface like an angry beetle. "Incoming call, mother." I stared at it. The vibration was a physical intrusion. I let it ring, once, twice, then, realizing that silence was a form of passivity, I picked it up. I put it on speaker. "Geraldine?" Beatrice's voice filled the room, shrill and distorted. "How dare you? How dare you humiliate us like this?" "Hello, mother," I said. I signaled Marcus to keep working. He didn't look up, but I saw him typing faster. "The caterer just tried to run the card for the Champagne Tower deposit," she shrieked. "Declined. In front of the event planner. Do you know who that is? That is Stefan. He does the mayor's parties." He looked at me like I was a pauper. "You are a pauper. Mother, I said, you just spent your last $150,000. That was family money. Roger's voice roared from the background. He must have snatched the phone. You selfish, ungrateful girl. We raised you. We gave you everything. And now, because you are jealous of your brother's success, you want to sabotage him. Jealous? I asked. Of what? The fake followers, the paid friends, or the fact that he can't play a C major scale without his hand cramping? There was a pause on the line. A heavy, guilty silence. You know about that. Roger's voice dropped an octave, losing its bluster. I know everything, I said. I know he has focal hand dystonia. I know, doctor. Vance was the only chance he had, and I know you stole the money that was supposed to fix him. It is not that bad, Roger snapped, recovering his denial. He just needs to relax. It is stress. And anyway, you make plenty of money. $150,000 is nothing to you. You can earn it back in a few months. Why are you being so petty? Archer needs this launch. It is his big break. Why can't you just be a supportive sister for once instead of a miser? A miser, I repeated. I sold my grandmother's watch for that fund. I ate instant noodles for 8 months. Oh, spare me the sob story, Beatrice cut in. You love playing the martyr. Just unfreeze the cards. Geraldine, Stefan is waiting. If we don't pay the deposit in 10 minutes, we lose the yacht. Let it go, I said. The party is over. If you do this, Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. If you ruin this for him, you are no daughter of mine. I think we established that when you stole my medical fund, I said. Goodbye, Beatrice. I hung up. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at me, his expression unreadable. Do not look at me like that, I said. I am not done. I opened my laptop. I pulled up my email. Who owns the lease on the penthouse? Marcus asked. Technically, I said, typing rapidly. I do. I signed as the guarantor because Roger's credit score is abysmal, but it is a month-to-month agreement now. I never got around to renewing the annual contract. I drafted an email to the landlord. Subject notice of lease termination. Penthouse 4B. Dear Mr. Henderson, please accept this as formal notice that I am terminating the lease for the property at 1100 Lakeshore Drive, effective immediately. All future payments from my accounts are unauthorized. Please begin eviction proceedings if the occupants do not vacate within the statutory 30-day period. I hit send. That is the roof over their heads, Marcus noted. They have a yacht, I said. Let them live on that. I was not finished. I logged into the family mobile plan. Select all lines. Deactivate. I logged into the insurance portal. Cancel policy. 2024 Mercedes S-Class. Cancel policy. 2023 Range Rover. I logged into Netflix. Hulu. HBO Max. Spotify. Change password. Sign out of all devices. It was petty. Yes, it was microscopic compared to the theft of 150 grand. But it was about control. For my entire life, they had controlled me through guilt. Now, I was controlling them through infrastructure. They wanted to live like kings. Let them build their own kingdom. Geraldine, Marcus said. Look at this. He turned his tablet towards me again. He had Twitter open. Archer is live, he said. I clicked on the video. There was Archer, sitting in the back of an Uber because his card had been declined at the bar. Presumably, he was crying, or acting like he was crying. The lighting was dramatic, casting shadows over his cheekbones. I just don't know, guys, Archer was saying to his phone camera. I try so hard. I work my fingers to the bone for my art. But there are people, toxic people in my own family who just want to see me fail. My sister cut me off, just like that, because she is jealous. She is corporate. You know. She doesn't understand the soul of an artist. She wants to control me. She is trying to silence my music. The comments were scrolling by in a blur of support. User 1, stay strong. King, User 2. Toxic family is the worst. Cut her off. User 3. Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon. Sis. My phone started buzzing again. Not my parents this time. It was Aunt Linda, then Cousin Mike, then a friend of Beatrice's from the country club. Text from Aunt Linda Geraldine. I just saw Archer's video. How could you be so cruel? He is your baby brother. Text from Mike. Really cutting off their phones on Thanksgiving. That is low. Even for you. They were swarming. My parents had mobilized the flying monkeys. They were spinning the narrative before the bodies were even cold. They were painting me as the villain, the rich, heartless sister crushing the dreams of the sensitive, struggling artist. I felt a surge of nausea. I wanted to reply. I wanted to scream the truth. He is not an artist. He is a fraud. They stole my surgery money. Do not engage, Marcus said, reading my mind. That is what they want. They want you to get in the mud with them. If you argue, you look defensive. If you stay silent, you look powerful. He was right. I picked up my phone. I went to the settings. Block contact. Linda. Blocked. Mike. Blocked. The country club lady. Blocked. I went down the list, systematically excising anyone who had ever taken my parents' side, anyone who had ever told me to be the bigger person. I was done being big. I was going to be small, sharp, and impossible to swallow. One last thing, Marcus said. His voice was different now. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a note of genuine concern. I traced that payment to Paper Trail Solutions. I couldn't get the invoice, but I found a corresponding charge on the Cook County Clerk's website. The county clerk? I frowned. For what property taxes? No, Marcus said. It was a filing fee, $50, paid yesterday. He turned the screen to me. It was a receipt for a court filing. The case number was new. The plaintiff was Roger and Beatrice Southwell. The defendant was Geraldine Southwell. They sued me, I asked, bewildered. For what, cutting off their allowance? Not a lawsuit, Marcus said grimly. It is a petition. They filed it yesterday, before you even asked about the money. They knew you would find out eventually. This was their contingency plan. I leaned in, squinting at the document type code. Procon 2026. Probate, I whispered. Conservatorship. The room seemed to tilt. The forgery charge, the court filing, the concern about my health. They aren't just trying to keep the money. I realized, the horror washing over me like ice water. They are trying to take me. They want to declare me incompetent. They want control of everything, my assets, my job, my mind. They are going to say your heart condition has affected your mental state, Marcus said. They are going to use your own lie against you. I sat back in my chair. The city lights of Chicago blurred into streaks of gold and blood red. I had thought this was a financial dispute. I had thought I was fighting thieves. I was wrong. I was fighting kidnappers. And they were my own parents. I had always considered Ethelgard Systems my sanctuary. The 42nd floor, with its minimalist glass walls and the hum of high-frequency trading servers, was a world of pure logic. Here, effort equaled output. Here, incompetence was the only sin. But when I walked in the next morning, the air felt different. The receptionist, usually quick with a warm greeting, avoided my eyes. The security guard checked my badge for a second too long. The sanctuary had been breached. Geraldine, a voice called out as I approached the elevators. It was not my assistant. It was Eleanor Vance, the Vice President of Human Resources. She was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, flanked by two men from legal. We need to speak with you, in my office, now. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I have a strategy meeting with the Tokyo team in 10 minutes. Eleanor. That has been canceled, she said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was final. I followed them. The walk to HR felt like a march to the gallows. Inside Eleanor's office, the blinds were drawn. On the table lay a thick manila folder. We received a formal complaint this morning, Eleanor began, sitting down but not inviting me to do the same. From a Mr. and Mrs. Roger Southwell, your parents. I stood straighter. This is a personal matter. Eleanor, it has no bearing on my performance at Ethelgard. They allege, the lawyer to her right interjected, opening the folder, that you have been using company resources to facilitate money laundering, specifically, moving funds into offshore medical trusts to evade taxes. That is absurd, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. My finances are transparent. You can audit me. We will, the lawyer said. But there is more. They provided documentation suggesting that you are suffering from severe psychological instability. They claim you have been fabricating medical conditions to solicit funds from family members, which you then funneled into these accounts. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a bank statement, my bank statement, but it was wrong. The numbers were inflated. The recipient names altered. It showed transfers of $50,000 to Cayman Holdings on dates when I had actually paid my mortgage. This is forged, I said, pointing at the paper. Look at the font on the date. It is Arial. The bank uses Helvetica. This is a bad Photoshop job. We have to investigate. Geraldine, Eleanor said, you know the policy. The chief strategy officer cannot have a cloud like this over her head. The SEC would eat us alive if this leaked. So, what? I asked. You are firing me because my parents learned how to use Adobe Acrobat. We are placing you on administrative leave, Eleanor said. Paid, of course, pending the results of a third-party investigation. Your access to the building and the servers is suspended effective immediately. Please hand over your badge and your company phone. I looked at them. I looked at the badge I had worn for 5 years. The badge that gave me access to the only life that was truly mine. My parents were not just greedy. They were tactical. They knew that without my job, without my title, I was vulnerable. They were stripping me of my identity, forcing me back into the role of the dependent daughter. If I had no income, I would have to crawl back to them, or so they thought. I placed my badge on the desk. I placed my phone next to it. You are making a mistake, I said, but I will let you figure that out on your own. I walked out. I did not pack a box. I did not say goodbye to my team. I walked straight to the elevators, my head held high, while the whispers of the junior analysts trailed behind me like smoke. I did not go home. I went to the one place where sharks were welcome. The law offices of Elias Thorne were located in a steel monolith on Walker Drive. Elias was known as the Great White of Chicago litigation. He did not settle. He did not negotiate. He hunted. I sat in his office, recounting the events of the last 24 hours. Elias listened, his eyes closed, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the arm of his leather chair. When I finished, he opened his eyes. They were the color of ice. They are trying to break you, Elias said. It was not a question. They do not just want the money. Geraldine, they want the goose. If they get a conservatorship, they control your assets, your medical decisions, your residence. They can force you to work and take your salary. They can put you in a facility if you disobey. How do we stop them? I asked. I have the proof, the forgery, the text messages. No, Elias said. He leaned forward. We do not stop them. Not yet. Excuse me. If we show our hand now, it is a civil dispute, Elias explained. She said, the family court judges hate getting involved in rich people's drama. They will order mediation. You will spend 2 years arguing over receipts. I don't have 2 years, I said. Archer's hand. Forget Archer's hand, Elias snapped. Archer is collateral damage. We need to focus on the enemy. We need them to commit a crime, a real, undeniable felony. Right now, they are flirting with fraud. We need them to marry it. How? Let them think they are winning, Elias said. Do not fight the suspension. Do not scream at them. Go dark. Let them believe you are crumbling. When a narcissist thinks their victim is weak, they get sloppy. They will overreach. And when they do, when they perjure themselves in open court or forge a document that carries federal weight, that is when we close the trap. I nodded. It went against every instinct I had. I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream. But I knew Elias was right. I had to play dead to kill the vulture. I left his office an hour later, feeling a strange, cold resolve. I had a plan, but the enemy was already at the gate. As I walked into the lobby of the Ethelgard building to retrieve my car from the garage, since my company privileges were revoked, I had to park in the public lot. I saw a commotion near the revolving doors. A small crowd had gathered. In the center of it was Archer. He was wearing a tattered sweater one I knew cost $600 but was designed to look distressed. He was holding his phone up, filming himself. He had the sad filter on. I just wanted to talk to her. Archer was sobbing into the camera. I just wanted to ask why she hates us. My mom is crying at home. My dad is sick with worry. And she just sits up there in her ivory tower. He saw me. He turned the camera toward me. There she is. There is the sister who abandoned her family on Thanksgiving. The security guards were hesitating. They knew me. They liked me. But they also knew I had just been suspended. Uncertainty paralyzed them. Archer ran toward me, the phone thrust in my face like a weapon. Geraldine, why won't you talk to us? Why did you cut off Mom's electricity? She is old. She could freeze. I stopped. I looked at the phone. I looked at the people watching, former colleagues, clients, strangers. I could see the judgment in their eyes. Look at the cold corporate bitch. Look at the poor, crying brother. I remembered Elias's advice. Go dark. I did not shield my face. I did not shout. I simply kept walking, moving toward the exit with a steady, rhythmic pace. Archer scrambled to keep up, dancing around me like a boxer. Say something. Tell the world why you stole our money. I reached the door. The cold wind of Chicago hit me. Archer followed me out onto the sidewalk. The crowd stayed behind the glass. For a brief second, we were alone in the noise of the street. Archer lowered the phone slightly, thinking he was off camera, or that the wind would mask his voice. He leaned in close to my ear. Unfreeze the cards. Jerry, he hissed. Give the money back, and I delete the video. I will tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will save your precious job. I stopped. I turned to look at him. His eyes were dry. There were no tears, only the calculation of a junkie needing a fix. I did not speak. I reached into my pocket and tapped my phone. Voice memo saved. I had recorded it. The extortion. The malice. I looked at him one last time. I didn't see my brother. I saw a stranger with a dying hand and a dead soul. I turned and got into my car. As I drove away, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a notification from a process server app. You have been served. I pulled over to the curb a few blocks away and opened the digital document. State of Illinois. Circuit Court of Cook County. Petition for appointment of guardian for disabled person. Petitioner, Roger Southwell. Beatrice Southwell. Respondent, Geraldine Southwell. Alleged disability. Acute paranoid schizophrenia. Bipolar disorder with manic spending. I read the text. It was a work of fiction. They claimed I was hearing voices. They claimed I had threatened to burn down the penthouse. They claimed the heart condition was a delusion I had invented to gain sympathy. They were using my own lie, the aortic aneurysm, as proof of my insanity. Because there were no medical records of a heart condition. They argued that my belief in it was evidence of psychosis. It was brilliant. It was evil. They wanted total control, plenary guardianship. They wanted the right to decide where I lived, who I saw, and how I spent every dime of the fortune I had built. I put the phone down. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. Elias wanted a felony. They had just handed me one, filing a false petition under penalty of perjury. Okay, I whispered to the empty car. You want me crazy? I will show you crazy. I put the car in drive. The game had changed. It was no longer about money or medicine. It was about survival, and I was the one with the teeth. The silence in my apartment was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the windows like the deep water of Lake Michigan. Outside, the digital world was screaming. My name was trending in local circles. The narrative had been set. The concrete poured around my feet before I even knew I was standing in it. To the public, I was the ice queen, the corporate sociopath who had cut off her elderly parents and struggling artist brother in the middle of a blizzard. But inside my walls, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the rustle of paper. I sat at my dining table, the legal petitions spread out before me like a map of a war zone. I read the words again, letting their poison seep into my understanding. Petitioner alleges that the respondent, Geraldine Southwell, suffers from acute paranoid delusions. Evidence a respondent has repeatedly claimed to suffer from a life-threatening aortic aneurysm, a condition for which no medical record exists. Respondent used this fabricated illness to hoard assets and emotionally manipulate family members. It was brilliant. It was diabolically, horrifyingly brilliant. They had taken my lie, the lie I had constructed to save Archer, and turned it into the cornerstone of my insanity. They were not denying I said I was sick. They were proving I was a liar, and in the eyes of the law, a woman who invents a fatal heart condition to hide money is not a protector. She is mentally unstable. She is a danger to herself. They were arguing that I was hoarding money because I was delusional, not because they were thieves. I did not go on Twitter. I did not post a rebuttal on LinkedIn. I did not text my friends to explain. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to fight, to scream the truth, but I remained silent. Silence was the canvas upon which they would paint their own destruction. I put on my coat. I had a meeting to attend, one that could not happen over the phone. Dr. Silas Vance met me in a small, dimly lit coffee shop in the University District, far from the prying eyes of the Loop. He looked tired. He was a man of science, a man who fixed nerves with microscopic precision, and he looked uncomfortable sitting across from a woman who was currently being painted as a villain in the tabloids. "I will testify, Doctor," Vance said, wrapping his hands around a mug of black tea. "I have the emails. Geraldine, I have the consultation notes from 8 months ago. You were clear that the fund was for Archer. The intent was rational. You are not delusional." "Thank you, Doctor," I said. "My lawyer will be in touch to depose you." "Doctor," Vance hesitated. He looked down at the table, tracing the wood grain with a finger. "There is something else. I saw the video, the one your brother posted from the yacht." I stiffened. "I did not watch it." "You should not," he said. "But I did. I watched it with a diagnostic eye. Geraldine, he was holding a champagne flute in his left hand. And he was not trembling," Vance said. His voice was grave. "With the progression of dystonia I saw 8 months ago. Holding a stem glass like that should be impossible without significant tremors. Unless what? Unless he is heavily medicated," Vance said. "Beta blockers, muscle relaxants, or opioids, to achieve that level of steadiness for a social media video. He would have to be chemically suppressing his nervous system to a dangerous degree. He is masking the symptoms, not treating them. He is burning the candle from both ends." "The golden window," I said, the phrase tasting like ash, "is gone," Vance said softly. "Even if we operated today, the chances of full recovery are less than 20%. He is damaging the neural pathways every time he forces his hand to perform like that. He is killing his gift to save his ego." I nodded. I felt a profound, hollow sadness. I was fighting to save a violinist who no longer existed, but I was still fighting for myself. I returned to my apartment and called Elias Thorne. "It is time to bait the hook," Elias said. His voice was sharp, energized. "They have filed the petition, but they haven't won the hearing yet. They need to prove you are incompetent. We need to prove they are predators. What do I do?" "Send the email," Elias commanded. "Make it sound weak. Make it sound like you are cracking under the pressure. Give them exactly what they want to hear. A narcissist cannot resist the urge to gloat." I sat at my computer. I opened a new draft. My fingers hovered over the keys. I had to suppress my pride, my rage, and my intelligence. I had to write like a frightened daughter. To Roger Southwell. Beatrice Southwell. Subject: Please stop. Mom, Dad, I cannot do this anymore. The lawyers, the HR investigation, the shame. It is too much. I am not crazy. You know I'm not crazy. I just wanted to save the money. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was too intense. Please, can we just stop this court case if I release $50,000 to you now? Will you drop the petition? I just want my life back. I am tired. Geraldine. I hit send. Then I waited. The response came in 12 minutes. They must have been sitting by their devices, waiting for my white flag. From Roger Southwell. Subject re. Please stop. Geraldine. We are glad you are finally seeing reason, but $50,000 is an insult after the humiliation you caused us. This isn't about the money anymore. It is about your well-being. We cannot trust you to manage your own affairs. You are clearly unwell. We are proceeding with the guardianship to ensure you are taken care of. However, if you transfer full control of the Ethelgard stock options and the trust liquid assets to us immediately, we might consider allowing you to live in your own apartment under supervision. As your parents, it is our right to decide how family resources are used. Including that surgery money, you need to learn your place. Dad, I read it twice. Got you, I whispered. I forwarded the email to Elias. He just admitted it, I typed. He admitted using the surgery money was his right, and he is conditioning the dropping of a mental health petition on the transfer of stock options. That is extortion. It is beautiful, Elias replied instantly. It proves the petition is not about your health. It is a negotiation tactic. But we need more. We need the motive. Why are they so desperate? $150,000 is a lot, but they blew through it in a week. Why do they need total control? The answer came 3 hours later, from a ghost. My phone rang. Unknown number. I usually ignored these, but something told me to answer. Geraldine. The voice was raspy, elderly, accompanied by the sound of wind. This is Arthur Sterling. I worked with your father at the firm, back in the 90s. I remembered him. He was one of the few men my father hadn't alienated. Hello, Mr. Sterling. I heard about the trouble, he said. The lawsuit. Look, I shouldn't be telling you this. Roger would kill me. But I have a daughter your age, and what he is doing is wrong. What is he doing, Arthur? It is not just the lifestyle. Geraldine, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Roger is in deep. He has been gambling, not at the casino, private games, high-stakes poker in the backrooms of the meatpacking district. He owes people, bad people. He owes them more than $500,000. The puzzle pieces slammed into place. The desperation, the immediate theft of the trust fund, the forged documents, the conservatorship. They didn't just want to live in a penthouse. They were running for their lives. They needed access to my entire portfolio, not to buy handbags, but to keep my father's knees from being broken by a loan shark. Thank you, Arthur, I said. You have no idea how much this helps. Be careful, Arthur warned. Desperate men do desperate things. I hung up. I walked to the bookshelf in my living room. I pulled down an old photo album. The leather cracked and fading. I opened it to a page from 20 years ago. It was a picture of Archer and me. He was 6, holding a toy violin. I was 12, standing behind him, my hands on his shoulders. We were both smiling. It was before the expectations crushed him, before the money poisoned us. I traced his face in the photo. I was not crying for the money. I was not crying for the job I had lost. I was crying because I knew that the brother in this photo was dead. The Archer who existed now was a drug-addled puppet, dancing for likes while his father sold him out to pay off gambling debts. I closed the album. I am sorry, Archer, I said to the empty room, but I have to burn the house down to kill the rats. I went to the kitchen to make tea. It was 7 in the evening. The city was dark. Then, the pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was a heavy, authoritative hammering that shook the door in its frame. Geraldine Southwell police opened the door. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the peephole. Uniforms, two of them, and a man in a suit holding a clipboard. I opened the door. "Geraldine Southwell?" the officer asked. He was large, imposing, his hand resting near his belt. "Yes. We have an ex parte order signed by Judge Holloway," the man in the suit said. He thrust a paper at me. "Based on the sworn affidavit of Dr. Leonard Crane, you have been deemed an immediate danger to yourself and others due to an acute psychotic break. We are here to transport you to St. Jude's Behavioral Health Center for a mandatory 72-hour evaluation." I looked at the paper. Dr. Leonard Crane. I had never met a doctor. Leonard Crane. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice calm, though my blood was freezing. "I have never met this doctor. This is a false report. You can explain that to the intake board," the officer said. Stepping into my apartment. "Ma'am, please step away from the table. Do not make this difficult." I looked at the signature on the affidavit. It was dated 2 hours ago. My parents had found a doctor who, presumably, also had gambling debts or a price tag that Rogers loan sharks had helped finance. They had weaponized the system. They had bought a medical diagnosis to lock me away before I could use the evidence I had gathered. If I fought, I was violent. If I screamed, I was hysterical. If I resisted, I was paranoid. The trap had snapped shut. "I need to call my lawyer," I said. "You can make a call from the facility," the officer said, taking my arm. His grip was firm, impersonal. "Let's go." I looked back at my laptop on the table. The email from Roger, the recording of Archer, the spreadsheet from Marcus. It was all there, but I was being dragged out the door. They led me down the hallway of my own building. My neighbors were peeking out of their doors. I saw Mrs. Higgins from 4B watching with wide, fearful eyes. I walked with my head up. I did not struggle. I let them lead me into the elevator. My parents had played their ace. They had used the ultimate nuclear option. They had put me in a cage, but as the police car doors closed, trapping me in the hard plastic back seat, a cold, dark thought comforted me. They had locked me up to shut me up, but they had forgotten one thing. 72 hours was not an eternity, and when I got out, I would not just be a plaintiff, I would be a survivor. And survivors are the most dangerous people on earth. The back of a police cruiser smells of stale sweat and vinyl cleaner. It is a specific, suffocating scent that sticks to the back of your throat. I sat with my hands in my lap, watching the city of Chicago streak by through the wire mesh divider. The lights of the skyscrapers were no longer beautiful. They looked like bars of a cage I had been living in without realizing it. They took me to St. Jude's Behavioral Health Center. It was a brick fortress on the west side, a place where people were sent when they became inconvenient to society or themselves. My parents had sent me here not to get well, but to disappear. They needed 72 hours. 3 days to raid my accounts. 3 days to solidify the narrative that I was mentally incompetent. 3 days to erase the credibility of the only person who could expose them. The intake process was a ritual of dehumanization. A nurse with tired eyes and rough hands asked me to remove my jewelry, my Cartier watch, my diamond studs, then my belt, then my shoelaces. They stripped me of the sharp edges I used to define myself, leaving me in a paper-thin hospital gown and grip socks. "Name?" the nurse asked, typing into a battered computer. "Geraldine Southwell," I said. My voice was low, level, devoid of tremor. "Do you know why you are here, Geraldine?" My parents filed an emergency petition claiming I am suffering from acute paranoid delusions and posing a danger to myself, I replied. They utilized an affidavit signed by a doctor, Leonard Crane, whom I have never met, to secure an ex parte order. The nurse stopped typing. She looked at me over her glasses. In this room, she was used to screaming, weeping, or incoherent babbling. She was not used to a defendant reciting legal statutes in the tone of a board meeting. "You sound very calm for someone who was just dragged out of their home," she noted. "Panic implies confusion," I said. "I am not confused. I am waiting." They placed me in a holding room. It was a white box with a bed bolted to the floor and a camera blinking in the corner. The light was fluorescent and relentless, humming with a frequency that felt like a drill into the skull. I sat on the edge of the mattress. I did not pace. Pacing is a sign of anxiety. I did not curl into a fetal position. That is a sign of regression. I sat with my spine straight, my hands folded, staring at the wall. If I screamed that I was sane, I would look crazy. If I demanded to be released, I would look agitated. The only way to prove I was not a danger was to be the most boring person in the building. Time became a fluid concept. Without my watch or phone, I measured the hours by the shift changes of the nurses. I slept in 20-minute intervals. I ate the bland oatmeal they slid through the slot. I was a statue of compliance. Sometime the next morning, the door opened. A man in a white coat entered. He was younger than I expected, with dark circles under his eyes and a weary intelligence in his face. His badge read, Dr. Aris, attending psychiatrist. He pulled up a metal chair and sat across from me. He held a clipboard. Good morning, Geraldine, he said. I am Dr. Aris. I am here to evaluate you. How are you feeling? I am cold, I said, and I am concerned about my employment status, as I am currently absent without leave. Your file says you believe you have a heart condition. Doctor, Aris said, looking at his notes. An aortic aneurysm. Is that correct? This was the trap. If I said yes, I was delusional because there were no medical records. If I said no, I admitted to being a pathological liar, which supported their claim of instability. I told my parents I had a heart condition, I corrected him. That is a factual statement. I did tell them that. But do you actually have one? No, I said. I do not, doctor. Aris raised an eyebrow. Why lie about a fatal illness? Because I needed to secure $150,000 in a liquid trust fund to pay for a stereotactic neurosurgery for my brother, Archer, who suffers from focal hand dystonia. I said, my parents are financially irresponsible. If they knew the money was for Archer, they would have spent it. Fear of my death was the only leverage I had to ensure the funds remained untouched. Unfortunately, my leverage failed. They spent the money on a yacht party last week. I spoke clearly. I used precise terminology. I did not cry. I laid out the timeline, the medical diagnosis of my brother, the name of the surgeon in Zurich, and the specific amounts transferred. Doctor, Aris stopped writing. He looked at me for a long time. Then he flipped back to the first page of the file, the affidavit from Dr. Leonard Crane. Doctor, Crane says here that you were hearing voices and threatening to burn down your apartment. Doctor, Aris said. I have never met Dr. Crane, I said. Does his affidavit include any session notes, any dates of treatment, or is it just a generalized statement of concern? Doctor, Aris frowned. He scrutinized the paper. It is vague. Doctor, Aris, I said, leaning forward slightly. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of a Fortune 500 company. I manage a portfolio worth billions. Do I look like someone who hears voices? Or do I look like a woman whose parents are desperate to control her assets because they are in debt to loan sharks? Doctor, Aris closed the folder. He capped his pen. You are lucid, he said, oriented to time, place, and person. Your reasoning is abstract and complex. You exhibit zero signs of psychosis or mania. Thank you, I said. This is not a medical case, he murmured, more to himself than to me. This is a domestic dispute. He stood up. I am updating your chart. Patient is stable. No evidence of stated pathology. Recommendation for immediate discharge. I felt the first crack of relief in the armor I had worn for 24 hours. However, Doctor, Aris added, the ex parte order allows them to hold you for up to 72 hours for observation. Even if I clear you, it is a legal gray area. Administration might want to keep you just to be safe from liability. They won't keep me, I said. My lawyer is in the lobby. I was guessing, but I knew Elias Thorne. He did not sleep when there was blood in the water. 2 hours later, The heavy steel door buzzed. A nurse entered, looking flustered. Behind her stood Elias. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the nurse's annual salary. He looked like a shark that had just walked onto a beach. "Get your things. Geraldine," Elias said. He held up a court order stamped with the seal of the chief judge. "We are leaving." My parents had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed that once I was in the system would crush me. They forgot that the system runs on paperwork. By forcing me into an evaluation, they had created an official medical record authored by an independent, state-appointed psychiatrist that certified I was perfectly sane. I changed back into my clothes. I tied my shoelaces. I put on my watch. With every item I reclaimed, I felt my power returning. We walked out of the hospital into the biting cold of the Chicago afternoon. The wind felt like freedom. "They just handed us the golden ticket," Elias said as we got into his town car. "The false police report, the abusive process. This is malicious prosecution. We can sue them for everything they have, and everything they ever will have. I do not want to sue them yet," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "I want to destroy them in probate court first. I want the judge to look at them and see monsters." "Oh, he will," Elias said. He pulled a file from his briefcase. "While you were enjoying the hospitality of St. Jude's, I did some digging on your doctor, Leonard Crane." "The man who signed the affidavit?" "The very same. It turns out Dr. Crane lost his license to practice in Ohio 10 years ago for prescribing opioids to addicts for cash. He moved here and got reinstated on a technicality. But here is the kicker." Elias held up a photograph. It was a grainy surveillance shot from inside a dimly lit room. "This is the VIP room at the Golden Ace, an underground poker club in the meatpacking district." I looked at the photo. There, sitting at a table with a stack of chips, was my father, Roger. And sitting right next to him, laughing and holding a drink, was a man I recognized from the Google search I had done in my head. Dr. Leonard Crane. "They are gambling buddies," I whispered. "Roger owes the house money," Elias explained, "but he also owes Crane money. He paid off his debt to the doctor by trading a favor. Sign this paper so I can lock up my daughter and get access to her funds, and I will pay you back double when I get control." It was so tawdry, so cheap. My freedom had been traded for a stack of poker chips. "We have them," I said. "Perjury, conspiracy, fraud." "We have them," Elias agreed. "The hearing is set for Tuesday. We go in, we drop this bomb, and we watch them burn." My phone, which Elias had retrieved from the police property locker, buzzed in my hand. I looked at the screen. "Incoming call, Archer." I stared at the name. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the sound of the consequence. I answered. I did not speak. "Jerry." His voice was small, terrified. It sounded like he was crying. But this time, it wasn't for TikTok. "Jerry, are you there? Mom said you were gone, in a hospital." "I am out," I said. "What do you want?" "Archer." "It is my hand," he sobbed. The sound was guttural, raw. "I woke up this morning and I cannot hold the chopsticks. I tried to eat lunch, and they just fell out of my hand. My fingers are curling in. Jerry, they won't open. It hurts. Not the muscle, but it feels like my brain is screaming at my hand, and the line is dead." I looked out the window. The snow was gray slush on the side of the road. "The pills aren't working anymore," Archer continued, his panic rising. "I took 3 beta blockers. Nothing. I need the surgery. You have to help me. Please. I know you are mad. But this is my life. I will die if I cannot play. You know I will die." "I cannot help you," I said. "What do you mean? You have the money. You always have money." "I do not have the money," I said. "Roger and Beatrice have the money. They spent it on your yacht party, and the rest, they are using it to pay for the lawyers to keep me locked up so they can steal the rest of my estate to pay off Dad's gambling debts." "That is not true," Archer stammered. "Dad said you were sick. He said he was protecting the money for you. Archer, I said. My voice was as cold as the glass against my cheek. Dad traded your hands for a poker game, and you let him. You drank the champagne. You took the photos. You chose the party. I didn't know, he wailed. I didn't know it was that bad. Ignorance is a choice, I said. You are 26 years old. You are not a child. You are an accomplice. Please, Jerry, I am scared. You should be, I said. Go ask Mom and Dad for help. Ask them to sell the yacht memories. Maybe the bank will accept Instagram likes as a deposit. Jerry, please. I ended the call. I stared at the black screen. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, crushing weight of severing a limb. Archer was the only person I had ever loved unconditionally. But love without boundaries is just self-destruction. I had cut off the gangrene. It hurt, but it was the only way to survive. You okay? Elias asked quietly. No, I said, but I will be. I looked in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different. The softness around the eyes was gone. The hesitation in the jawline had vanished. I had spent my life trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the safety net that caught them when they fell. That woman was gone. She had been left in a holding cell at St. Jude's. The woman in the mirror was cold. She was sharp. She was dangerous. I was no longer Geraldine Southwell. The daughter, I was Geraldine Southwell, the plaintiff, and I was ready to deliver the verdict. The probate division of the Circuit Court of Cook County was a room designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of dark oak paneling and fluorescent lighting that buzzed with the low frequency of a dying fly. The air smelled of floor wax and the stale anxiety of families tearing each other apart over inheritances and custody battles. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded on the polished wood. I wore a navy blue sheath dress, high-necked, long-sleeved, no jewelry, no makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had been dragged through a system designed to break her. Next to me, Elias Thorne was arranging his papers with the precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the judge. He was in his element, across the aisle. My family was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Roger sat hunched over, wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big, an old one he hadn't worn since the 90s to make himself look frail and diminished. Beatrice was dressed in a muted gray cardigan, clutching a tissue she hadn't used yet. She looked like the grieving mother of a lost child. Not a woman who had screamed at me about champagne deposits 48 hours ago. And Archer. I stared at my brother. He was wearing a soft knit sweater and, on his left hand, a heavy black medical brace. It was a prop. I knew it was a prop because he had not seen a doctor since I cut off his insurance. He was wearing it to signal victimhood to the judge, to visually reinforce the narrative that I had abandoned a disabled sibling. The irony was nauseating. His hand was dying, but he was using the symbol of his injury to help the people who had stolen his cure. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway entered. He was a man with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that had seen too many lies to trust anything but a bank statement. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the 2 tables. We are here on the matter of the petition for guardianship of Geraldine Southwell, Judge Holloway said. His voice was dry. Mr. Briggs, you represent the petitioners. You may proceed. Harrison Briggs, my parents' lawyer, stood up. He was a man who looked like he was made of hair gel and unearned confidence. He walked to the center of the room, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, Briggs began, his voice dropping to a sympathetic baritone. This is a tragedy, a simple tragedy. We have here a young woman, Geraldine, who has achieved incredible professional success. But the pressure of that success has fractured her mind. She suffers from acute paranoid delusions. She believes her loving parents are thieves. She believes she is dying of a heart condition that does not exist. She has cut off all contact, leaving her disabled brother and elderly parents without support in the middle of winter. We are asking the court to step in. Not to punish her, but to save her from herself. He gestured to me as if I were a broken vase he was trying to glue back together. "We call Dr. Leonard Crane to the stand," Briggs announced. I felt Elias stiffen beside me. This was it. The first domino. Doctor. Crane walked to the witness stand. He looked better than he had in the surveillance photo Elias had shown me. He was shaved, wearing a clean white coat over a tie. He swore to tell the truth. "Dr. Crane," Briggs said, "you signed the affidavit stating that Ms. Southwell is a danger to herself. Can you explain your diagnosis?" "Yes," Crane said, clearing his throat. "Based on the information provided by the family, the subject exhibits classic signs of persecutory-type delusional disorder. She invents physical ailments to manipulate those around her. She displays extreme financial paranoia. It is my professional opinion that she requires immediate custodial care." "Thank you, Doctor," Briggs said. "Your witness." Elias stood up. He did not walk to the podium. He stood right at our table, leaning casually against the edge. "Dr. Crane," Elias said, "how long did you examine Ms. Southwell before signing that affidavit?" Crane shifted in his seat. "As I stated in the report, the urgency of the situation required a remote assessment based on family testimony." "So, 0 minutes, Elias said. "You diagnosed a woman you had never met, never spoken to, and never observed, based solely on the word of her father. It is standard procedure in emergency situations," Crane stammered. "Is it—" Elias walked toward the witness stand now. He moved slowly, predatorily. "Is it also standard procedure to diagnose the children of men to whom you owe significant gambling debts?" "Objection," Briggs shouted. "Relevance. This is slander." "I have the receipts, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice cutting through the objection like a knife. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. "I have here a ledger from a private establishment known as the Golden Ace. It shows a debt of $12,000 owed by a doctor, Leonard Crane. And here," Elias held up a second paper, "is a transfer of $12,000 from Roger Southwell to Dr. Crane, dated the same day the affidavit was signed." The courtroom went silent. Judge Holloway peered over his glasses at the witness. "Dr. Crane," Elias continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "did you diagnose my client because she is sick, or did you diagnose her because you folded a pair of kings and missed her?" "Southwell offered to buy your marker." Crane looked at Roger. Roger looked at the floor. "I resent that implication," Crane squeaked. "I don't care what you resent," Elias snapped. "I care that you perjured yourself to facilitate a kidnapping." "No further questions." Judge Holloway looked at Crane. "You may step down, Doctor, and do not leave the building. The bailiff will have a word with you shortly regarding the penalties for filing false medical instruments." Crane practically ran from the stand. The first pillar of their case had crumbled into dust. Briggs looked rattled. He shuffled his papers, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your Honor, the witness's personal life is irrelevant to the facts. The fact remains that Ms. Southwell has engaged in erratic, self-destructive financial behavior. She cut off her family's basic utilities. She stopped paying for her brother's medical care." "Let's talk about finances," Elias said. "We call Geraldine Southwell to the stand." I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I walked to the witness box and sat down. The wood was hard. I looked at my parents. Beatrice was glaring at me with a hatred so pure it almost looked like love. "Ms. Southwell," Elias said gently, "your parents claim you are financially paranoid, that you hoard money and refuse to help them. Is that true?" "No," I said. "Can you tell the court how much financial support you have provided to Roger, Beatrice, and Archer Southwell over the last 5 years?" I said. "I prepared a forensic accounting of all outgoing transfers from my personal accounts to theirs." Elias handed a thick binder to the judge and another to Briggs. "The total," I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence, "is $512,440.62. A murmur rippled through the gallery. $500,000, $500,000. And what did this money pay for? Elias asked. Everything. I listed. The rent on the penthouse, the lease on a Mercedes S-Class and a Range Rover, Archer's tuition for 3 different music conservatories he dropped out of, their country club membership, their health insurance, their vacations to Cabo, Aspen, and Paris. Even the suit my father is wearing today, I paid for that in 2022. I looked at Roger. He shrank into his oversized jacket. Does this sound like the behavior of a paranoid hoarder? Elias asked. No, I said. It sounds like an ATM machine that finally ran out of cash. Your witness, Elias said to Briggs. Briggs stood up. He knew he was losing. He needed a kill shot. He needed to prove I was a liar. And he had one card left, the card I had given him. Ms. Southwell, Briggs said, walking up to the stand. That is a lot of money. You are clearly very generous, but let's talk about honesty. You told your parents, repeatedly, that you were suffering from an aortic aneurysm. Is that correct? Yes, I said. I did tell them that. And you used this condition to justify moving $150,000 into a restricted trust fund, correct? Yes. Do you have an aortic aneurysm, Ms. Southwell? The room seemed to hold its breath. This was the perjury trap. I looked Briggs in the eye. No, I do not. Aha, Briggs shouted, turning to the judge. She admits it. She fabricated a terminal illness, Your Honor. What kind of person lies about dying? A sick person. A person who is mentally unstable. She is a pathological liar who invented a tragedy to get attention and control. Why did you lie, Ms. Southwell? Judge Holloway asked. His voice was stern. He did not like liars. I turned my face to the judge. I let the mask drop. I let him see the exhaustion, the betrayal, the sheer crushing weight of being the adult in a room full of children. I lied, Your Honor, because if I told them the truth about the money, they would have stolen it. It was your money, the judge said. Why would you need to hide it? Because in my family, I said, my voice trembling slightly for the first time, my income is considered community property. My parents believe they are entitled to every dollar I earn. I needed to save $150,000 for a specific, life-saving purpose. I knew that if I left it in my checking account, or even a savings account they knew about, they would guilt me into spending it. They would invent an emergency. They would claim they were dying. So, I invented an emergency first. I created a threat they couldn't argue with my own death. It was the only way I thought I could keep the money safe. And did it work? The judge asked softly. No, I said. They accessed the trust anyway. They spent every penny while I was allegedly waiting for heart surgery. Spent it on what? The judge asked. What was so urgent that they raided a medical fund? This was the moment. I could have told him right then. I could have said, it was for Archer's hand. I could have explained the focal hand dystonia. But if I did that, Roger would argue that he didn't know. He would argue that he thought the money was just sitting there, and since I wasn't really sick, no harm was done. He would claim ignorance. I needed him to claim malice. I needed him to claim ownership. So I stayed silent on the specific purpose. I just said, I don't know. Your Honor, you would have to ask them. Mr. Southwell, Judge Holloway said, looking at my father. Stand up. Roger stood up. He looked indignant. He looked like a man who was used to talking his way out of speeding tickets. You heard your daughter, the judge said. You admitted in an email, which has been entered into evidence, that you used the funds. You claimed it was your right. What did you spend $150,000 on in a single week? Roger straightened his tie. He thought he saw an opening. He thought he could spin this. He assumed that since I hadn't mentioned Archer's hand, the money was just general funds. Your Honor, Roger said, using his best boardroom voice. Geraldine is dramatic. She hoards money. We knew she wasn't really sick. We are her parents. We know when she is lying. We decided that the money shouldn't sit stagnant. We decided to invest in it. Invest it? The judge asked. In what stocks, bonds? In the future, Roger said, gesturing to Archer. My son is a prodigy, a virtuoso, but the music industry is all about perception. We used the capital to launch his brand. We organized a networking event, a high-profile gathering on a yacht to introduce him to the cultural elite of Chicago. It was a business expense, Your Honor, an investment in the family business, which is my son's talent. So, the judge clarified, his eyes narrowing, you took money from a trust labeled medical expenses, which you believed was for your daughter's heart surgery, fake or not, and you spent it on a party. It wasn't a party, Roger insisted, his face turning red. It was a launch event. It was for Archer's career. Geraldine has plenty of money. She didn't need that specific amount. We did what parents do. We prioritized the child who needed help. You prioritized the child who needed a party over the child who said she needed surgery, the judge corrected. She was lying, Roger shouted. She admitted she was lying. There was no surgery. But you didn't know that when you took the money, I said. I spoke from the witness stand, my voice cutting through his noise. When you signed the withdrawal slip, Dad, you thought I had an aneurysm. You thought I might die on the table, and you took the money anyway. Roger froze. He realized, too late, the trap he had walked into. It didn't matter that I wasn't sick. It mattered that he thought I was, and he robbed me anyway. It went to intent. It went to the moral rot at the center of his soul. Roger stammered. I knew you were exaggerating. You always exaggerate. And the purpose of the money, Elias interjected, standing up. You claim it was an investment in Archer's talent. You claim it was to launch his career as a violinist. Yes, Roger said. Exactly. Elias smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just tasted blood. So, you are testifying, under oath, that you spent $150,000 to promote Archer's career as a performing violinist. Yes, Roger said firmly. He is the next Joshua Bell. Thank you, Elias said. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, we have established that Mr. Southwell misappropriated trust funds for what he claims was a valid business purpose, his son's violin career. Now, we would like to present evidence as to why that investment was not only fraudulent, but physically impossible. Roger looked confused. Beatrice stopped clutching her tissue. Archer, sitting at the table, went pale. He knew what was coming. Impossible, Judge Holloway asked. Yes, Your Honor, Elias said, turning to the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. We call Dr. Silas Vance to the stand. The doors opened. Vance walked in, carrying a laptop and a projector. The trap had snapped shut. Roger had just sworn under oath that he spent the money to launch a career that he had effectively destroyed. He had claimed the money was for a violinist who could no longer play. He had framed his embezzlement as a business decision. Now, we were going to show the court that he had invested in a corpse. The doors of the courtroom swung shut behind Dr. Silas Vance, cutting off the murmur of the hallway. He walked down the center aisle with the purposeful stride of a man who spent his life navigating the sterile, high-stakes geography of operating theaters. He carried a leather briefcase that looked as old as the law itself, at the plaintiff's table. The confusion was palpable. Roger leaned over to whisper something to Beatrice, his brow furrowed in irritation rather than fear. They did not know this man. To them, he was just another suit in a room full of suits, perhaps a bank manager or a trustee I had hired to complicate their looting. They were so arrogant in their ignorance. Archer, however, was different. As doctor, Vance passed the railing. Archer looked up. I watched the color drain from my brother's face. It was not a gradual fading. It was instant, as if a valve had been opened in his neck. He recognized the man. He recognized the surgeon who had held his future in his hands 8 months ago. Archer shrank into his chair, pulling his left arm, the one in the dramatic black brace, tight against his chest. as if trying to physically hide the evidence of his own failure. "State your name and occupation for the record," Elias said. "Dr. Silas Vance," the witness stated, his voice a dry, precise baritone. "I am a neurosurgeon specializing in movement disorders, specifically focal hand dystonia in professional musicians. I am currently the chief of neurosurgery at the Zurich Institute for Performance Medicine." Roger let out a scoff that was loud enough to be heard by the court reporter. "Neurosurgery. What is this? My daughter claimed she had a heart condition, not a brain tumor. This is a waste of time." "Mr. Southwell," Judge Holloway warned, tapping his gavel. "Silence. Your Honor," Elias addressed the bench. "The petitioners have argued that my client, Geraldine Southwell, hoarded $150,000 based on a delusional belief in a non-existent illness. They argue that this money had no purpose other than to satisfy her mania. We are here to prove that the money had a very specific, very real purpose, one that required absolute secrecy." "Proceed," the judge said. Leaning forward, Elias turned to Dr. Vance. "Dr. Vance, do you recognize anyone in this courtroom?" "I recognize Geraldine Southwell," Vance said, nodding at me. "And I recognize the young man sitting behind the plaintiff's counsel, Mr. Archer Southwell. How do you know them?" "Mr. Southwell was a patient of mine," Vance said. "He presented to my clinic 8 months ago for a consultation regarding a loss of motor control in his left hand." Objection Briggs, my parents' lawyer, shot up. "Medical privacy. Mr. Southwell is an adult. His medical records are privileged and have no bearing on a guardianship hearing for his sister." "On the contrary," Elias countered smoothly, "the petitioners have made the Family Medical Trust the centerpiece of their argument for my client's insanity. They claim she invented a medical need. We are entitled to show that the medical need existed. It just belonged to the beneficiary of the trust, not the trustee. The money is the issue, and the medical condition is the reason for the money." Judge Holloway considered this. He looked at Archer, who was now staring at the table, shaking his head slightly. "Overruled," the judge said. "The origin and intent of the disputed funds are the core of this case. The witness may answer, but keep the testimony limited to the diagnosis and the financial requirements of the treatment." Elias nodded. "Dr. Vance, what was your diagnosis of Archer Southwell?" Vance opened a folder. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. "Mr. Southwell suffers from task-specific focal hand dystonia." Vance read, "It is a neurological condition where the brain's mapping of the fingers becomes overlapping. In layman's terms, when he attempts to play the violin, his brain sends conflicting signals, causing the ring and pinky fingers of his left hand to curl involuntarily. It renders professional performance impossible." "Impossible," Elias repeated. He turned to look at Roger. "So, he cannot be the next Joshua Bell." "Not without surgical intervention," Vance said. "The condition is progressive. It does not get better on its own. It ends careers." "And did you propose a treatment plan?" "I did," Vance said. "A stereotactic ventrooralis thalamotomy. It is a specialized procedure to reset the firing patterns in the basal ganglia, followed by 6 months of neurorehabilitation in Zurich. And the cost, the total package, including hospital fees, surgery, and therapy, was estimated at $148,000, Vance said. "Payable in advance to secure the booking." Elias walked back to our table. He picked up a document. "Your Honor, I am entering into evidence Exhibit D. These are email correspondences between Geraldine Southwell and Dr. Vance, dated 8 months ago." He handed the papers to the bailiff. "Dr. Vance," Elias said, "can you read the highlighted section of this email from my client?" Vance adjusted his glasses. It reads, "Dr. Vance, please hold the first week of December. I am liquidating my assets to create a trust. I will not tell my parents the money is for Archer, because they will not understand the urgency. I will tell them it is for me. It is the only way to keep the principal safe until the surgery date. the words hung in the air. I looked at my parents. Beatrice's mouth was slightly open. She looked from me to Archer, then back to me. The narrative she had built, the story of the jealous, crazy sister hoarding gold, was disintegrating. Roger's face had turned a mottled shade of purple. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the ledger in his mind, doing the math on the money he had stolen. "So," Elias said, turning to face the gallery, "Geraldine Southwell did not lie because she was crazy. She lied because she knew her parents." I stood up then. I did not ask for permission. The momentum of the truth pushed me to my feet. "I told you," I said, my voice cutting through the room. I looked directly at Roger. "I told you I was sick because I knew that if I said the money was for Archer, you would find a reason to spend it. You would say surgery is too risky. You would say he just needs to practice more. You would say you needed to borrow it for a sure-thing investment. That is not true," Beatrice cried out. "We would have done anything for him." "You did do anything for him," I shot back. "You threw him a party. You took the $150,000 that was sitting there to save his hands, and you blew it on a yacht rental and a champagne tower. You literally drank his cure." "We didn't know," Roger roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You lied to us. You said it was for your heart. If you had told us it was for his hand, we would have—" "You would have what?" I interrupted. "You would have stolen it anyway, because you owe money to loan sharks. Roger, you would have sold his future to save your kneecaps." "Order," Judge Holloway shouted. "Ms. Southwell, sit down." I sat, but the damage was done. The truth was out. Elias was not finished. He was a predator who liked to play with his food before the final bite. "We didn't know," Elias mocked, repeating Roger's words. "A convenient defense, but let us look at the timeline. Dr. Vance, when was the surgery scheduled for?" "December 2nd, Vance said. "Last Tuesday." "Last Tuesday," Elias said. "The same day as the yacht party," Elias nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the lights. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. "Petitioners claim they spent the money to launch Archer's career," Elias said. "They claim he is a rising star. Let us look at the star in action." The video began to play. It was the footage Marcus, my investigator, had ripped from Instagram before Archer deleted it. It showed the deck of the yacht. The music was loud, thumping bass that rattled the courtroom speakers. There were models in bikinis shivering in fur coats. There were waiters passing trays of caviar. And there was Archer. He was standing on a platform, a bottle of Dom Perignon in his hand. He was laughing, his head thrown back, but the camera zoomed in. It was a high-resolution video, shot in 4K. The zoom focused on his left hand clutching the neck of the bottle. The fingers were not gripping. They were clawing. The ring finger and pinky were curled tight against the palm, white-knuckled, spasming. The bottle was shaking violently, the wine frothing out of the neck, not because he was shaking it on purpose, but because he could not hold it still. "Freeze frame," Elias ordered. The image froze. The claw hand was undeniable. It looked painful. It looked broken. "Dr. Vance," Elias asked from the darkness, "is that the hand of a concert violinist?" "That is a hand in the advanced stages of focal dystonia," Vance said. "He is masking the tremor with alcohol and, I suspect, beta blockers, but the muscle contraction is severe." "And the surgery?" Elias asked. "The one that was scheduled for that exact day, the one that cost the exact amount of money Mr. Southwell spent on this champagne. It was missed," Vance said. "Mr. Southwell did not show up. Can he reschedule?" "No," Vance said. His voice was devoid of pity. It was just science. "As I explained to Ms. Southwell 8 months ago, there is a golden window for this procedure. Once the neural pathways calcify and the muscle fibrosis sets in, the brain loses the plasticity required to relearn the movement. Based on the severity I see in this video, and the fact that 8 months have passed without intervention." Vance took off his glasses. "The window is closed. The probability of him ever regaining the fine motor control necessary to play professional violin is now 0%. The lights came back on. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. 0%. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade that had just dropped. I looked at Archer. He was staring at the screen, at the frozen image of his own crippled hand holding the bottle that had cost him his career. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken something he could never fix. Then, slowly, he turned his head. He didn't look at me. He looked at Roger and Beatrice. His eyes were wide, wet, and filled with a horror that transcended anger. It was the look of a wounded animal realizing that the trap it was caught in had been set by its own mother. "You said," Archer whispered. His voice was a crack in the silence. "You said the party would help. You said I just needed exposure." Roger refused to look at him. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched, his face gray. Beatrice put a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "You bought balloons," Archer said, his voice rising, cracking into a sob. "You bought balloons with my hands." "Archer, please," Beatrice hissed, reaching for him. He recoiled as if she had burned him. He scrambled back in his chair, the heavy brace clunking against the wood. "We established that the money was stolen," Elias said, his voice quiet, final. "We established that the parents knew it was a medical trust, and we have now established that their theft resulted in permanent, irreversible physical disability to their son. This is not guardianship, Your Honor. This is battery." Judge Holloway looked down at my parents. The disgust on his face was etched into every wrinkle. He did not look like a judge anymore. He looked like a man who wanted to take a shower. "Mr. Briggs," the judge said to my parents' lawyer, "do you have any cross-examination, or would you like to save the court's time, and perhaps your client's remaining dignity?" Briggs stood up. He looked at the video still on the screen. He looked at Dr. Vance. He looked at the wreckage of the Southwell family. "No questions." "Your Honor," Briggs whispered. He sat down and closed his briefcase. It was over. The lie was dead. And lying on the floor next to it was the corpse of my brother's future. I watched them, feeling nothing but a cold, vast distance. I was safe. I was vindicated. But as I looked at Archer weeping into his ruined hands, I knew that the check I had written to buy my freedom had been very, very expensive. The silence that followed Dr. Vance's testimony was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a structure that had lost its load-bearing walls, the split second of stillness before the roof caves in. Archer was the first to move. He did not stand up gracefully. He surged upward, his chair scraping violently against the floor, a harsh screech that made the stenographer flinch. He was looking at the screen where the frozen image of his clawed hand mocked him, and then he looked at the man sitting next to him, the father who had promised him the world, the father who had served him the champagne that ultimately determined his future. "You said it would be fine," Archer whispered. His voice trembled, uneven and strained. Then it rose into a shout that shattered the solemn calm of the courtroom. "You said you could manage it. You said the money was just a bonus." Roger flinched, lifting his hands in a weak, defensive gesture. "Archer, please sit down. We can work this out. We can look for another specialist." "There is no other specialist," Archer cried out. He tugged sharply at his left arm. The dark medical brace, something he had worn to gain sympathy, came loose with the harsh sound of tearing fabric. He hurled it across the room, where it struck the jury box with a dull impact. His hand was now fully visible, without the brace, without any visual manipulation. Its condition was deeply disturbing, the fingers bent inward unnaturally, twitching in an erratic pattern that reflected severe nerve damage. "Look at it," Archer shouted, thrusting his hand toward Roger. "Look at what you paid for. This is what your decision gave me. You traded my hands for a boat ride." Archer lunged. He grabbed Roger by the lapels of his oversized suit. The two of them, the failing patriarch and the ruined prodigy, crashed into the defense table. Papers flew into the air, the fake affidavits, the bank statements, the lies fluttering down like confetti at a funeral. "Bailiff," Judge Holloway shouted, banging his gavel. "Order, I will have order." 2 deputies moved in. They were large men, trained to subdue violent criminals. Not hysterical violinists. They pulled Archer off his father. Archer was kicking and sobbing, all the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had come, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like a physical vacuum in the room. Roger straightened his jacket. He was panting, his face pale. He looked at the judge, attempting to regain some shred of dignity. "My son is emotional. It is the stress of the trial. He is not himself." "He is exactly himself," Judge Holloway said. The judge's voice was ice cold. He did not look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Roger and Beatrice. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen greed. I have seen malice. But I have never seen parents cannibalize their own children with such casual indifference." The judge picked up a pen. He wrote something on the file in front of him, the scratching sound amplified by the microphone. "The petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice," Judge Holloway declared. "There is absolutely no evidence of mental incapacity on the part of the respondent, Geraldine Southwell. In fact, she appears to be the only rational actor in this entire tragedy." Beatrice let out a small, strangled whimper. She reached for Roger's hand, but he pulled away. He was sensing the shift in the wind. He was looking at the doors. "However," the judge continued, and his eyes locked onto Roger, "this court cannot ignore the evidence presented today regarding the misuse of the Family Medical Trust, the filing of false affidavits by Dr. Crane, and the admission of perjury regarding the purpose of the funds. Your Honor," Briggs, their lawyer, stood up, his voice trembling. "We move to—" "Sit down, counselor," Holloway snapped. "I am referring this entire matter to the state attorney's office for immediate investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit perjury. Furthermore, based on the testimony regarding the payment to Dr. Crane to falsify a medical affidavit, I am finding probable cause for immediate detention." Roger's eyes went wide. "Detention. You cannot do that. I am a citizen. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Judge Holloway said. He nodded to the bailiffs. "Take Mr. Southwell into custody and ensure Dr. Crane does not leave the building." The room erupted. The bailiffs, who had just released Archer, moved toward Roger. My father looked at them, then at me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of a man who realizes the rules of his protected little life no longer apply. "Geraldine," Roger shouted as the bailiff pulled his hands behind his back. The metallic click-click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I am your father." I sat perfectly still. I watched them march him toward the side door, the one that led to the holding cells. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a gambler who had finally run out of chips. Beatrice was left alone at the table. She looked at the empty chair where her husband had been. Then she looked at Archer, who was slumped on the floor, weeping into his hands. Finally, she turned to me. She stood up and walked across the aisle. Her steps were unsteady. Her face, usually a mask of composed superiority, was crumbling. Her mascara was running into the deep lines around her mouth. "Geraldine," she said. Her voice was a plea, high and thin. "Geraldine, please, you have to stop this. They are taking your father. They are going to put him in a cage." I stood up. I towered over her in my heels. "He put himself there. Mother, he signed the affidavit. He spent the money. I didn't know." Beatrice grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, digging into my sleeve. "I swear to you, I didn't know it was for the surgery. I thought you were just being stingy. You know how you are with money. You are always so calculating. I thought you were hiding it to punish us." I looked down at her hand on my arm. I felt nothing, no anger, no pity, just a clinical observation of her delusion. You thought I was stingy, I repeated. So that made it okay to steal. You thought I was hoarding cash. So you decided to burn it on a party for a son you were actively destroying. We wanted him to be happy, she sobbed. We just wanted one nice thing. Why do you have to be so cruel? Can't you just call the lawyer, fix it? You always fix it. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I brushed the fabric of my dress where she had touched me. I am fixing it, I said. This is what fixing it looks like. Beatrice, it looks like consequences. But I am your mother, she wailed. I didn't know. I looked her in the eye. Ignorance is not a defense in a court of law. Mother, and it is certainly not a defense for a parent. You didn't know because you didn't care to ask. You preferred the lie because the lie paid for the champagne. I turned away from her. She stood there, gasping for air, realizing that the bank of Geraldine was closed forever. I looked at the floor. Archer was sitting cross-legged, like a toddler. He was not looking at his father being dragged away. He was not looking at his mother crying. He was staring at his left hand. It was twitching uncontrollably, the fingers dancing a macabre jig of nerve damage. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and empty. The arrogance of the influencer was gone. The bravado of the artist was gone. All that was left was a 26-year-old man with no skills, no money, and no future. It's gone, he whispered. Jerry, it's really gone. Yes, I said. It is. What do I do? He asked. It was a genuine question. He had never had to answer it before. I don't know, Archer, I said. For the first time in your life. That is entirely up to you. I signaled to Elias. He packed his briefcase, snapping the locks shut with a satisfying finality. We are done here, Elias said. We walked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. I did not look back. I heard Beatrice sobbing, a lonely, echoing sound in the large room. I heard the shuffling of the bailiffs, but I kept my eyes forward. When I pushed open the doors, the flashbulbs hit me like a physical blow. The hallway was packed. Reporters, cameras, microphones. The story had leaked. A high-profile executive at Ethelgard Systems, a guardianship battle, a fraud investigation. It was blood in the water for the Chicago press. Ms. Southwell, Ms. Southwell, is it true your father was arrested? Geraldine, did you really fake a heart condition? What happens to the trust fund now? Elias stepped in front of me, acting as a shield, but I stopped him. I did not need to hide. I had nothing to hide. I stepped into the circle of microphones. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the image of the woman who had burned her family to the ground to save herself. Ms. Southwell, a reporter from the Tribune shouted. Do you have a statement? How do you feel about your parents facing criminal charges? I looked into the lens of the nearest camera. I wanted Roger to see this on the news in his holding cell. I wanted Beatrice to see it in her empty penthouse. Justice has been served, I said. My voice was steady, projecting the icy calm that had made me a terror in the boardroom. The court recognized today that biology does not grant immunity from the law. Theft is theft, even if it happens at the Thanksgiving table. But your brother, another reporter asked. We heard about his hand. Is there any hope for his career? I paused. I thought of the 0% hanging in the air. My brother is a victim of a crime, I said. A crime committed by the people who were supposed to protect him. I hope his story serves as a warning. No one should ever have to choose between their family and their survival. I chose survival. Are you going to pay for his rehabilitation? Someone shouted. I already paid, I said. I paid $500,000 over 5 years. Today, the bill was finally settled. I turned and walked away. Elias flanked me, guiding me through the throng toward the exit. We pushed through the revolving doors and out into the biting wind of the Chicago winter. The cold air felt clean. It scrubbed the smell of the courtroom from my skin. It felt like a baptism. My car was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door. Good work, Elias said, shaking my hand. I will handle the press inquiries. Go home, Geraldine. Rest. I am not going home, I said. I am going to the office. I have a company to run. Elias smiled. A shark recognizing a shark. Of course you do. I slid into the back seat of the sedan. The door closed, sealing out the noise of the city. The silence was instant and total. I leaned my head back against the leather seat. I closed my eyes. I waited for the grief to hit me. I waited for the tears, the guilt, the crushing weight of knowing I had just sent my father to prison and left my mother destitute. But it didn't come. I searched my chest for the pain, probing for the ache of the heart I had claimed was broken. But there was nothing, no pain, no regret, no sorrow. There was only a vast, cool lightness. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted from raw shoulders. It was the feeling of a surgeon who had successfully excised a gangrenous limb. It wasn't happiness. Happiness was warm. It was cold. This was relief. I opened my eyes and looked out at the gray steel of the city passing by. I was alone. I had no parents. I had no brother. I had no one to cook Thanksgiving dinner for, and for the first time in 32 years. I could breathe. The smell of the Pines Rehabilitation Center was distinct. It was a mixture of industrial-strength lemon cleaner and the stale, metallic scent of chemically induced sobriety. It was not a place for healing. It was a place for waiting. I walked down the linoleum hallway, the clicking of my heels echoing off the beige walls. It had been 3 weeks since the trial. The snow outside had turned to a hard, dirty gray slush, reflecting the mood of the city. I was not here to offer comfort. I was here to close the ledger. Room 304 was at the end of the hall. The door was open. Archer was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a television that was turned off. He looked thinner. The softness of the influencer lifestyle had melted away, leaving behind the sharp, jagged angles of an addict in early recovery. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big, his hands resting in his lap. His left hand was still twitching. It was a subtle, rhythmic spasm, the ghost of a career that had died in a courtroom. "Hello, Archer," I said. He did not look up immediately. He let the silence stretch, a petty act of rebellion. When he finally turned his head, his eyes were dull, rimmed with red. "You came," he said. His voice was scratchy. "Mom said you wouldn't come." "Mom says a lot of things," I replied. I did not sit down. There was a chair, but sitting implies a desire to stay. "How is the treatment?" "They have me on methadone," Archer said, looking back at his hands, "and something to stop the tremors. It makes me feel like my head is wrapped in cotton. I can't think straight, but at least I don't feel the need to smash my hand against the wall anymore." "That is progress," I said. He let out a bitter laugh. "Progress. Is that what we are calling it?" He stood up then, his movements jerky. He walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "I keep thinking about it. Jerry, every night, I lie here and I replay the dinner, the yacht, the trial." He turned to face me. The anger that had been simmering under the surface began to boil over. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked. His voice cracked. "Why did you have to lie about the heart condition if you had just come to me 8 months ago and said, 'Archer, I have the money for your surgery, but we have to hide it from Mom and Dad'? I would have listened. I would have helped you." I looked at him. He actually believed that. He had rewritten the past to make himself a victim of my secrecy rather than a casualty of his own character. "No, Archer," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the guilt he was trying to provoke. "You wouldn't have—" "Yes, I would have," he shouted. "It was my hand. It was my life. I wouldn't have let them touch a dime if I knew it was for me." "You knew," I said. "I didn't—" "You knew something was wrong," I corrected him. "You knew we weren't rich. You knew Dad hadn't worked in a decade. You knew Mom spent money faster than I could earn it. And yet, when they told you they were renting a yacht for $20,000, you didn't ask where the money came from." When they hired the bot farm for your Instagram, you didn't ask to see the receipts. I took a step closer to him. You didn't ask because you didn't want to know. And more importantly, Archer, you were relieved. Relieved. He looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. I was terrified. You were terrified of the surgery. I said, Doctor, Vance told you the recovery would be brutal. 6 months of relearning how to move your fingers. 6 months of pain. There was a chance it wouldn't work. You were scared to fail. So when Mom and Dad offered you a party instead, a shortcut to fame, a way to feel like a star without doing the work, you took it. You chose the champagne over the scalpel because it was easier. Archer opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. He slumped against the windowsill. The truth hit him hard. He knew, deep down in the dark corners of his addiction, that I was right. He had been complicit in his own destruction because he preferred the fantasy of success to the hard labor of survival. I hate you, he whispered. You have everything. You have your job. You have your money. And I have nothing. You have your life, I said, which is more than you would have had if you kept taking those pills. I reached into my purse. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I placed it on the small table next to his bed. What is that? He asked. Money. Are you trying to pay me off? It is not money, I said. I went to the pawn shop on State Street yesterday. Dad had pawned it the morning of the trial to pay his retainer fee. Archer froze. He knew what was in the envelope. It is the deed of ownership, I said, and the reclamation receipt. Your violin is waiting for you at the front desk. I paid the ticket. It is yours again, free and clear. Archer stared at the envelope. Tears began to stream down his face, cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. I can't play it, he choked out. He held up his left hand, the fingers curling inward like dead leaves. I will never play it again. Why would you give it back to me? Is this a joke? Is this some kind of sick punishment? No, I said. It is a reminder. Keep it. Hang it on your wall. Look at it every day. Why? So you never forget what it costs to take the easy way out, I said. I turned and walked to the door. Jerry, he called out. Where are you going? I am going back to work, I said. Goodbye, Archer. I walked out of the room. I did not look back. I heard him sobbing behind me, a raw, ugly sound of mourning. I felt a twinge of pity, but I strangled it before it could reach my heart. Pity was expensive. I could no longer afford it. The drive back to the city was quiet. The skyline of Chicago rose from the gray mist like a fortress of glass and steel. It was a city of survivors, and I was finally one of them. The loose ends of my family were being tied up with the brutal efficiency of the legal system. Roger had taken a plea deal. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of the wire transfers, the forged affidavit from Dr. Crane, and the testimony of Elias Thorne, his lawyer had advised him to surrender. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of perjury. The judge, still angry from the spectacle in his courtroom, had been unsparing. 5 years. My father, a man who had never worn a shirt that wasn't Egyptian cotton, was currently processing into the Stateville Correctional Center. He would trade his golf clubs for a jumpsuit and his scotch for toilet wine. There would be no early parole. He had stolen from a medical trust. In the hierarchy of prison crimes, that placed him just above the abusers. He would not have an easy time. And Beatrice? I had received a letter from her lawyer, a public defender this time begging for a meeting. I had declined. The bank had foreclosed on the penthouse lease immediately after I stopped the payments. The creditors had descended like vultures. The Mercedes, the furniture, the jewelry, it was all gone. She was currently living in a subsidized housing unit in Gary, Indiana. It was a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of a steel mill. She was 60 years old and had never worked a day in her life. Now, she was learning how to navigate the bus system and apply for food stamps. She had called my office 12 times. I had instructed my assistant to block the number. I was not cruel. I was simply logical. If I gave her money, she would send it to Roger for his commissary fund, or she would waste it on lottery tickets hoping for a miracle. She had to learn, for the first time, the physics of survival. You only eat what you kill. I pulled into the underground garage of the Ethelgard Systems building. My reinstatement had been swift and public. The board of directors, terrified of a wrongful termination lawsuit and the bad PR from the trial, had welcomed me back with open arms. The CEO had personally apologized in a company-wide town hall, praising my integrity and resilience. It was all theater. Of course, they didn't care about my integrity. They cared that I was the only one who understood the Asian market strategy. But I accepted the apology, I accepted the raise, and I accepted the corner office with the view of the lake. I took the elevator up. The doors opened to the hushed atmosphere of the executive suite. My team was waiting. They looked at me with a new kind of respect. Fear, mostly. They knew what I had done to my own family. They knew that if I could send my father to prison, I would not hesitate to fire them for a missed deadline. I worked until 7 in the evening. I crushed the quarterly projections. I reorganized the logistics division. I was a machine of efficiency. At 7:30, I left the office. I did not go to the old apartment. I had sold it. Too many ghosts. I drove to my new place. It was a penthouse in the St. Regis, 60 stories up. It was modern, stark, and beautiful. The floors were white marble. The furniture was Italian leather. It smelled of nothing but clean air and money. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a bottle that cost $400. I opened the sliding glass doors and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was ferocious this high up. It whipped my hair around my face and stung my eyes. Below me, Chicago was a grid of golden light, a living circuit board of energy and ambition. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich, complex, with notes of dark fruit and oak. It tasted like victory. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up against the darkness. Incoming call. Cook County Department of Corrections. It was Roger. He was using his one phone call, or perhaps he had bartered for phone time. He was calling to beg, or to scream, or to tell me he loved me in that manipulative, wheedling tone he used when he needed a check. I stared at the screen. I could answer. I could listen to him cry. I could explain, one last time, why I did what I did. I could tell him that I missed the father he used to be. Before the greed ate him alive, but why? There was nothing left to say. Words were the currency of relationships, and we were bankrupt. I did not slide the bar to answer. I did not slide it to decline. I pressed the side buttons and powered the phone down. The screen went black, extinguishing his name, but that wasn't enough. I turned the phone over. I used the edge of my fingernail to pop open the SIM card tray. The tiny chip, the little piece of silicon that connected me to the world, to the past, to the number they all knew, fell into my palm. I held it up to the city lights. It looked insignificant, a speck of gold and plastic. I thought about the last 5 years, the $500,000, the lies, the fake heart condition, the nights I spent eating instant noodles while they dined on lobster, the look on Archer's face when he realized his hand was gone. They say family is everything, I said to the wind. My voice was snatched away instantly, carried out over the lake. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, that you have to forgive them because they are your people. I squeezed the SIM card between my thumb and forefinger. I felt it snap. A clean, sharp break. But sometimes, I continued, to have everything, you have to let go of the people who claim to be your everything. I lost $150,000. I lost a talented brother. I lost my parents. I tossed the broken pieces of the SIM card over the railing. I watched them flutter down into the abyss, disappearing into the wind like snowflakes. They would land somewhere on Wacker Drive, lost in the slush, never to be found. But in exchange, I whispered, raising my glass to the empty sky, I bought my freedom, I bought my sanity, and trust me, it was the biggest bargain of my life. I turned my back on the view. I walked inside, the heels of my shoes clicking on the marble. I closed the heavy glass door, shutting out the wind, shutting out the city, shutting out the noise. Inside, it was quiet. It was warm. It was mine. I took another sip of wine. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile for a camera. It wasn't a smile for a client. It was a smile for me. I walked to the kitchen island and set the glass down. The reflection in the dark window showed a woman who was whole. The screen fades to black. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Geraldine's journey resonates with you. If you are listening to this, I would love to know where in the world are you tuning in from. Please leave a comment below with your location and your thoughts on the ending. Did Geraldine do the right thing? And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world to us.